All right, we're joined now by State Senator Becca Balint from Vermont, who was the majority leader in Vermont from 2017 to 2021 in the Senate there, and is now running for U.S. Congress, and also, most importantly, was my state senator last year. Loyal viewers of this show know I was living in Vermont during the pandemic last year, although I don't think I knew that you were my state senator, so welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invitation.
And I had a bunch of kids in Dover Elementary School, and you were telling us that you just ran up from the floor working on a bill that would make school free in public schools, or what's the universal school program? And then we'll get into the interview, but I'm curious about this.
It's universal school meals. And so for breakfast and lunch, so that every child in a school in Vermont, both public and independent, would have access to meals both at the breakfast hour and at lunch, because we feel so strongly that we know the incredibly strong tie between someone having decent food and being able to learn. And that is a focus that we've had in the Senate for years, is making sure kids are ready to learn regardless of their background, as we say, regardless of their zip code, that they're showing up at the school doors ready to learn. And part of that is making sure they have food.
And so we wanted to talk about the House race in Vermont, because it's an extremely important one, not just because there's only one member of Congress that comes from Vermont, but also both of Vermont's senators are, and this is not breaking any news, they're nearing the end of their careers. And so one of the current congressmen, Peter Welch, just is moving now seamlessly, basically without any contest, from the U.S. House into the Senate. And so there's now a contested primary, a Democratic primary, and you've got a kind of what we would call here in D.C. a corporate Democrat, Molly Gray, who was she's still lieutenant governor. She was lieutenant governor. And then you have kind of two candidates fighting out in the progressive lane, yourself and Kesha Ram. She's state representative from near Burlington, is that right? State senator now.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is an interesting situation, because progressives have had a difficult time around the country consolidating, whereas the establishment candidates have often, as we saw, most famously in the 2020 presidential campaign, consolidating around one candidate and knocking out the progressive challenger. And so what is the progressive movement in Vermont doing in this race? Like, how are you trying to make sure that you're distinguishing yourself as the rival to Molly Gray in this primary? Because whoever wins this primary is, basically going on to win the House seat.
So I really appreciate the question, because I think a lot of people are watching this race both in Vermont and outside. And, what I want people to know is I am the same candidate I've always been, which is a progressive Democrat from one of the most progressive districts in the state. So you basically have the district around Brattleboro, Vermont, and the district around Burlington that are the most progressive. So I have been, as you said, the majority leader, but also as the president pro tem, have consistently passed progressive legislation that Vermonters have counted on. And so for me, one of the distinctions is I have not just stood up for these issues. I've been the one within the Senate making sure these issues pass, whether it's minimum wage increases, paid family leave, climate action investments, housing investments, the most progressive reproductive legislation in the country. So I have a strong track record of making sure we have the votes in the caucus, on the votes on the floor, and feel of all of the candidates in the race, I am the one who has delivered on progressive values. Now, it is an interesting question to always to consider, how's it going to shake out in the race. I have quite a few progressives who are behind me and endorsing me. I have a very big tent of support. And one of the things I would want your viewers to know is I was elected to the position of president pro tem, first ever woman, first ever openly gay person to be in leadership in either chamber. And I was elected unanimously. So progressives voted for me, Republicans voted for me, Democrats voted for me, because I am someone who's known as a straight shooter. I have integrity and I get work done. I don't just, make public statements about wanting, aspirationally to get work done, I actually do the work on the ground to pass that legislation. So I think that is a strong distinction. And I think it's also important for folks to know I came to this work as a middle school teacher. I always joke that if you can teach middle school, you can do just about anything. And sometimes being in politics and being in leadership is a lot like teaching middle school. But more importantly, I taught in 4 different rural schools in Vermont. And I understand at a very deep level what families are going through, working families here in Vermont. And that informs all of the work and the decision making that I do.
Amazing moment while we're talking about teaching for Ryan's daughter to make a cameo there. Becca.
Your daughter.
Does she want to say hi, Ryan?
Yeah, she's home with COVID today.
Oh. So, Becca, one question I have for you. Amazing. One question I have for you is, it seems like a very legitimate selling point in this primary is exactly what you just said, that you've been able to bring in Republican voters, independent voters. Vermont is such an interesting and rich political state. And so what lessons have you learned over your career in politics that allow you to bring that coalition together?
It comes back to people understanding that I am a woman of values. And those values include believing in the power of community and connection, that we as Vermonters are able to come together on really hard issues, even if we have political disagreements, even if we have philosophical disagreements, that in the end, when you walk in this building, you are here because you want to show up for your constituents, as we say here in Vermont, the people back home, who are the people that sent you here to do the work. And time again, I have shown that I am truly someone who comes to the work with an open heart and an open mind. And even if someone has voted against, my rights, this goes to the heart of it for me, is that when I first came into the Senate, I served with people who voted against my rights to marry my spouse, who voted against civil unions, who voted against same-sex marriage, but I still showed up, did the work with them in committee, did not write them off as human beings, and thought, you know what, that was hurtful. That was not something that I can forget easily. But in the end, I have to put those things aside to be able to do work for my constituents, because that's why I was sent here. And that has has guided me throughout my time here. And honestly, I mean it most sincerely, that if you can do the work within a middle school of everyone who is struggling with their identity and their ego, and see them as the human beings that they are, you can bring that work into politics. And I think it serves me well.
Well, Becca, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your work up in Vermont. We really appreciate it and hope you have a great weekend.
I really appreciate the time. And you too. Have a great weekend.
Thanks so much. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.